Hello and welcome to Mental Health in Children and Adolescents, How to Support Your Child. Today's session is sponsored by the Weinberg Family Cerebral Palsy Center at Columbia University Irving Medical Center. My name is Kelly Spina and I'm the Senior Coordinator of Operations for Adult Day Services here at Adapt Community Network. We have several departments I oversee, which include our Day Habilitation Department, Supplemental Day Program, and our Supportive Employment Services. These departments typically work with adults that are over the age of 21. For day programs, we have site-based locations in almost every borough, and we're actively enrolling people through our admissions department. Our Supportive Employment Department works to provide people with job training, on-site support, and support in exploring different career paths. A couple of housekeeping rules. Please put any questions for the presenter in the Q&A. If you're having technical difficulties, there will be answers to common questions in the chat section. The session is being recorded and you can watch it again online at www.adaptcommunitynetwork.org. Be sure to follow us on social as well at Adapt We Change. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's session featuring Dr. Erin Rivelis. Dr. Rivelis holds the position of Assistant Professor at the Rose F. Kennedy Children's Evaluation and Rehabilitation Center at Children's Hospital at Montefiore. She serves as co-director of the Child and Adolescent Unit and Externship Coordinator and specializes in work with children and adolescents with neurodevelopmental disabilities. She is also an adjunct associate professor of psychology and education at Teachers College, Columbia University, where she teaches a course in psychoeducational assessment. Dr. Rivelis obtained her undergraduate degree in psychology from the University of Michigan, and she then went on to receive her PhD in the school psychology program at Teachers College, Columbia University. Let's get started. Please welcome Dr. Rivelis.
Thank you, Kelly. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I know this is a very hectic time of day, and I know you are at the tail end of what sounds like was a day chock full of probably lots of information. So I appreciate everyone being here. As Kelly mentioned, my name is Dr. Erin Rivelis, and I'm a psychologist at the Rose F. Kennedy Children's Evaluation and Rehabilitation Center, also known as CERS, at the Children's Hospital at Montefiore. I know that's a bit of a mouthful, and I'm honored to be here today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So in the meantime, I'll tell you a little bit about what is on our agenda for this afternoon. We're going to talk about some general tips and strategies for ensuring the well-being of children and adolescents and their families. Here we go. Let me just share this. Okay, there we go. So we're going to talk a little bit about some general strategies and tips for ensuring or increasing the well-being of our children and adolescents and families. We're going to talk about when to seek help, since this is often a question that gets raised, how to know when to seek help from a professional, whether it be a professional in a child's school or outside of a child's school. And we're going to talk a little bit about how to decide what type of professional to seek support with, because sometimes that can be a complicated question and one that is not always so easy to navigate. Throughout the presentation, I'll also be including some resources that can be helpful in our work with children and adolescents, as well as my contact information at the end. So should anyone have any questions that we are not able to get to in the Q&A, you can certainly feel free to reach out to me. So one of the hats that I wear as a psychologist is a therapist. And one of the things that therapists love to talk about with children and adolescents and the families that we work with are emotions and helping children to identify how they're feeling and start to verbalize how they're feeling, which comes easier to some people than others, as well as how to cope with different feelings and experiences that we have. So this is clearly not an exhaustive list of emotions, but these are examples of some commonly experienced emotions that children and adolescents and adults experience. Okay, so we're going to talk about how to facilitate healthy emotional functioning. And we're going to delve into each of these bullet points in greater detail. But we're going to talk about how to encourage open communication and encourage emotional expression. We're going to talk about how to provide information to children and adolescents in a way that is appropriate for them given their developmental level. We're going to talk about the importance of sharing emotions, different types of coping skills that children and adolescents and their families can utilize, the importance of routine and structure, along with healthy eating and sleeping. And of course, very importantly, is parent self-care. So when we talk about encouraging open communication, we really are talking about encouraging children to share how they're feeling, to share their thoughts about different topics or subjects, to encourage them to ask questions if they're curious about topics or have concerns, to be able to really verbalize them and express them to their parents or family or caregivers. Inquiring into what children understand and what questions they have is a way of sort of giving them permission to ask those questions or to express their confusion or curiosity. Having adults involved in the children's lives check in regularly to see how are they feeling and what are they thinking, what sort of questions they might be having. And then, of course, providing developmentally appropriate responses to the questions that children pose. So I intentionally did not make today's talk COVID specific because I'm sure many people that are attending this talk have attended numerous COVID related talks over the past couple of years. But I am providing this COVID related example because I think it gives a good illustration of when talking to children of different ages and or developmental levels, some things that we want to keep in mind to ensure that we're providing information in a developmentally appropriate way. So when we're talking about early elementary school age children, we generally want to provide information to them that is brief, it's simple, it's straightforward, and we want to, depending upon the circumstance, provide appropriate reassurance that adults are there to help them, such as in the example of COVID, that adults are working hard to keep children safe. Children that are in upper elementary school or even early middle school may have more questions. They may want to know about safety or what's going to happen. They may need some support in figuring out what is real from what is not real. And they may want and be able to engage in more of a detailed conversation about, in this COVID example, what is being done to keep them safe. As children get into upper middle school and high school, issues can be discussed with many of these children in more depth. They can be referred to appropriate types of resources, and adults can be honest and accurate and factual, of course, in a developmentally appropriate way, and engage these adolescents or preteens in a decision-making process. So in this example about COVID, making family plans and scheduling or strategies that the family is using to maintain their safety. But I think throughout all of these developmental levels, being a good listener and conveying to children that the adults in their lives are there to listen to them and support them and to encourage them to verbalize their thoughts and their feelings. I think one important piece to keep in mind is that I've divided these stages up by grade or type of school, so to speak. But I think for parents to think about their child and being the expert in their child and what their child can understand and not understand, or handle versus not handle, regardless of the grade in which they're in, is really important, because there's tremendous variability from child to child. So emotional expression. So this is something that comes very easily to some and is much more challenging or sometimes even uncomfortable for others. Encouraging the expression of emotions, like naming emotions and talking about one's emotions, is important for children and adolescents to learn. Adults are in a really wonderful role where they can model emotion talk for children and adolescents, and really try to understand the child's concerns, to normalize their emotions, because it is normal to experience a wide range of emotions, to validate how their children are feeling, to remind themselves that they don't need to make it all better, but they can help provide a space for children and adolescents to explore their concerns and maybe even seek help on occasion when needed. And we'll circle back to that in a couple of minutes. We mentioned providing information, right? So trying to do so honestly, directly, following the child's lead to see what their understanding is of a given topic, not overwhelming them with too much information, and knowing that as an adult, it's okay to say when you don't know something. So if a child asks an adult a question about something and the adult doesn't know the answer or doesn't know maybe how to respond in an appropriate way, it's a wonderful opportunity to model for kids that no one really has all of the answers, but we can problem solve how we may go about finding that, whether that is doing some research online with a reliable, developmentally appropriate source, or whether it's seeking the help of someone else who may be able to have that answer or point them in the right direction, but a great opportunity to model that problem-solving style. One helpful strategy is highlighting what is under the child's control. So in the example that I used before with COVID, the past few years have been a very challenging years, plural, and there have been many things that have really felt out of our control. But there are certainly strategies and behaviors that are under our control. So making decisions about washing hands or social distancing or getting enough sleep are all decisions that families can make in a way that feels right for them. And to keep the lines of communication open and the conversation going. So these are not one-time conversations. These are really ongoing conversations over time. Sharing emotions. So this is something that takes practice for many people. I often find in the children and families that I work with, helping families make it a regular part of their routine, whether that is in the morning before school, or when a child comes home from school, or at the dinner table. And these can be turned into fun activities. So an example of a game to facilitate sharing of emotions or different types of feelings is the rose and thorn game. You may do this at the dinner table or at another time of day. And each person, let's say at the dinner table, will go around and they might share a rose, or the best part of their day, and a thorn, or the most difficult part of the day. You can simply go around the table and talk about two feelings experienced today. Or you can turn it into a game like feeling charades, where someone at the table has to identify a situation and a feeling that they experienced that day and act it out, and see if the other family members or individuals at the table can guess what that feeling might be. There's no right or wrong way to do it, and families can play around and modify these different approaches. But the idea is making it fun and making it part of the regular routine to talk about how individuals are feeling. One of the strategies that I find really helpful is utilizing developmentally appropriate books to help give children the language to talk about their feelings. I find that it's often very normalizing for children to see if they are experiencing a certain emotion or experience, that an entire book has been written and published and disseminated and purchased maybe by millions of people who may also be experiencing a similar type of experience or emotion. And I find that they can be really helpful for parents as well, to give parents that developmentally appropriate language to use when talking about certain feelings or experiences with their children. So this is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are just meant to highlight that there are thousands and thousands of books out there that are about a whole host of different topics, written at very different age levels and grade levels, to facilitate emotional expression, whether they be general feeling related books or books specific to a certain experience or emotion, like anxiety or fear about going to bed or difficulty managing one's temper. And there are books that are more adolescent specific that may help provide parents, but also adolescents, of exploring and using, learning certain language to use and increasing their comfort in talking about different emotions. So books, I find, can be a really wonderful resource. A lot of local libraries have a lot of these books. Many of them can be purchased on Amazon or other similar types of websites. So family coping. So there are probably an infinite number of different types of coping skills and strategies to use. So again, this is not an exhaustive list. This is really just a sampling of some coping skills that some families find helpful. And these can be modeling emotions. So having adults in the home or even older siblings model their emotion talk, so to speak, or different ways that they cope with emotions. It can be keeping a journal or a diary. And for some, that may mean writing in their journal each day or each week. For others who may not find that writing process particularly relaxing or helpful, or maybe they have some learning disabilities in writing, or maybe some fine motor difficulties, they can draw or they can paint or they can adapt it in whatever way is helpful for them. Mindfulness and meditation activities, exercise and going for a walk or a run or doing yoga or doing something relaxing like listening to music or reading a book. Identifying friends or family members that individuals can go to when in need of support. Different hobbies that bring joy to the individual or the family. Art, coloring, drawing, and again, not an exhaustive list because we could spend all of today talking about different coping skills, but these are just some examples that come to mind. And of course, seeking help, professional help when needed. The importance of routine and structure. So routine and structure provides security for children and families, consistency. I want to sort of revise this. I'm not sure I would say it removes uncertainty and doubt, but maybe it minimizes uncertainty and doubt. And families can have weekday schedules and routines or weekend schedules and routines. And while I think that routine and structure and consistency is very important, I also think that it's important to be able to be flexible. because it will not always be possible to adhere to whatever given schedule the family has put in place. So being able to have that consistency, but also be flexible when something arises and you have to modify your typical routine. Related to the scheduling and consistency, healthy eating and sleeping habits. So healthy eating, good sleep hygiene improves energy, it improves attention, it improves mood and motivation and productivity. So very important to keep in mind. And last, but certainly not least, is parent self-care. This is, I would say, probably one of the most important slides in this presentation, because without parents taking care of themselves and making sure that they have the supports they need, they will not be able to adequately support their children and give them everything that they need. So, and easier said than done, but having parents make sure that they are taking time for themselves and taking care of themselves so that they can be there as much as possible to support their children. So we talked on one of the very first few slides about different emotions individuals experience. And emotions often occur on a spectrum. So most individuals experience most emotions at various points in their life. But the question is, when does something become a diagnosis or a disorder? And this slide shows many common diagnoses or conditions made in children and adolescents. Some of them fall more in the mental health realm. So things like anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, some of the behavioral disorders like oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, and some of them are more developmental in nature. So we have learning disabilities and language disorders, autism and intellectual disabilities, ADHD. I'm not sure if I said that yet or not. Many of these are quite common. Many of these really co-occur. So it's not uncommon for children to experience maybe some learning challenges, and maybe they need some speech and language therapy. Perhaps they also have some anxiety around academics or other areas. So quite common to co-occur with one another. So the question comes into play: how do I know if my child needs professional help? So a couple of things to keep in mind is there is tremendous variability in child development. There is tremendous variability in how children experience and cope with emotions. And experiencing emotions is normal and it's healthy. But one thing to keep in mind is, when do certain emotions or behaviors, or do certain emotions or behaviors begin to interfere with a child or family's day-to-day life? Does it impact their ability to follow a schedule? Does it impact their social functioning or their academic functioning or emotional or behavioral functioning? And when those experience of emotions or certain behaviors begin to really impact the child's life or the family's life, that may be an indication that it's time to consult with a professional. And I think a good rule of thumb is, if in doubt, ask for help, because you could seek the assistance of a professional who may say and reassure you, this seems really developmentally appropriate for a child of whatever age, managing whatever types of situation. So it certainly can't hurt to ask. So some questions to ask yourself when you're in this process of deciding whether to seek professional help. So one question is, well, what are the emotions or behaviors that are concerning you? So an example might be Mark's teacher told me that he gets very nervous and he cries when he doesn't understand something, and it's hard to calm him down. Another question is, how often do these concerns arise? So, for example, one time Melissa cried when she didn't know an answer, versus this week, Melissa cried every day, sometimes multiple times per day, when she didn't know the answer. A third question is, are these behaviors developmentally appropriate? So, for example, Lewis cried on his first day of kindergarten, versus Lewis cried and did not want to go to school for the first 3 weeks of high school. So we might expect a first day kindergartner to be tearful or a little apprehensive. Whereas when we have a high school student, we may not expect them to be tearful or apprehensive for the first several weeks of school. So what is developmentally appropriate in those situations? How long have these concerns been present? So Kiara has been irritable and having difficulty sleeping this week, versus Kiara has been irritable and having difficulty sleeping for the past month. And then another question to ask are, how are these concerns impacting my child's functioning? So for example, Chloe's temper tantrums prevent her from being able to do her homework, or Jamal's anxiety prevents him from leaving the house or using public transportation. So I think these are helpful questions to ask oneself when thinking about whether to seek professional help. They're also helpful in sort of organizing thoughts prior to an appointment with a professional, so that you have some information in the front of your mind regarding what are the specific areas of concern, how often do they arise, are they developmentally appropriate, which sometimes is difficult to tease apart. How long have these concerns been present, and how are they impacting the child or adolescent's functioning on a day-to-day basis? So a couple of helpful questions to keep in mind. So now let's fast forward and assume that the decision has been made to seek the assistance of a professional. The next question is, with whom do I seek help? There are lots of different providers out there that work with children and adolescents around a whole host of topics, including mental health issues, developmental issues. And these can include the child's primary care pediatrician, so their regular pediatrician that they go to for annual physicals or well visits, or if they're feeling ill. Sometimes these individuals have followed them over time, maybe even their siblings, and may have longstanding relationships with the family. There are developmental behavioral pediatricians. There are psychiatrists and neurologists. There are psychologists and social workers, other types of therapists, tutors. There's school personnel, so school psychologists, guidance counselors, school social workers, teachers, and not an exhaustive list. I'm sure there's numerous other types of providers that I've inadvertently left off this list. But the point being, once you make the decision to seek help, the next decision is with whom to seek help. And there's not always a straightforward answer to that question. And we'll walk through some of the problem-solving steps in deciding with whom to seek help. Often a child's primary care pediatrician is a very good first step. They often know the child. Sometimes they have longstanding relationships with the family, and they may be able to assess what the concern is and make a recommendation to the family about what type of provider may be the best fit. And they may even have specific referral resources of people that they have worked with in the past to provide to the family. There's also quite a bit of overlap between these different providers in some of the work that they do. So there's really no right or wrong answer when deciding this. There may be certain professionals that are a better fit for certain children given the concerns than others, but there's no clear right or wrong way of proceeding. So one question is, do I seek help for my child within their school or outside of school? And I've broken this down into school-based supports and out-of-school supports. So when we're thinking about school-based supports, we have generally two overarching categories with which children can get some supports and services. And we'll talk a little bit about each of those. But one of those is a 504 plan, and the other one is an IEP, an individualized education program. And then we have out-of-school supports, and that can include psychotherapy / counseling, often used synonymously or interchangeably. Sometimes there's a medication management option. Other types of therapies like speech and language therapy or occupational therapy, physical therapy, tutoring, and many other types of supports out there. So we're going to talk about the two general categories of school-based supports. The first being a 504 plan. And a 504 plan, the name comes from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Usually people just call it a 504 plan. And what a 504 plan does is it can provide reasonable accommodations to support children in school in accessing the general education curriculum. So it provides accommodations for some sort of disability that substantially limits one or more major life activities. Now, I cannot take credit for this wonderful slide. This comes directly from the Advocates for Children website. At the end, one of my very last slides are some examples of resources that have really wonderful information on their websites in an easily accessible way. So we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. The Advocates for Children website, Advocates for Children is a really wonderful organization for anyone who needs support navigating the special education system in schools, which is not always an easy system to navigate. Not only is it a wonderful organization, but it has a wonderful website that is chock full of information about a whole host of topics in a way that is really manageable, I think, for the reader. As someone who works in this field and works with children and adolescents and families and helps them navigate the special education system, I always refer to this website because I find that it gives really clearly delineated, easy to digest information. And so this comes directly from the Advocates for Children website. And what they have broken down are some examples of different types of accommodations that individuals can get based on different types of disabilities or needs. So for instance, for a student with medical need, it may mean getting medication administered during the school day, or for a child with asthma using a nebulizer, or a child with diabetes, maybe checking their blood sugar levels. For students with physical disabilities, it may mean access to the school elevator as opposed to having to use the stairs, or a paraprofessional to support them for mobility reasons. Or a modified participation in an adaptive physical education program. For students with emotional or behavioral difficulties, it may mean a behavior intervention plan, where a child's function of their behavior is identified, the specific behavior, how the teachers and school personnel will respond when a behavior is exhibited. It may also mean use of a paraprofessional or modifications to the classroom schedule. For students with learning disabilities, it may mean testing accommodations, like extra time on tests, or for a child who maybe has some challenges with reading abilities, they may need an accommodation of having tests or questions read out loud to them. They may need accommodations like for a child who, let's say, has some distractibility and attention difficulties. They may get an accommodation to take tests in a separate location or a location with minimal distractions, or preferential seating, where maybe they will be placed at the front of the classroom, away from potential distractions, or near the teacher who can easily redirect them as needed. It may require accommodations like use of a calculator if someone has, let's say, a specific learning disability in the area of math. That may be an accommodation for them. So again, a 504 plan is a way if a child has some sort of disability that impacts them or limits them in a life activity, academics and school being a life activity, they could be eligible for a 504 plan to afford them with these different types of accommodations in school. So under the umbrella of school-based supports, a 504 plan is one of our options. An IEP, or an individualized education program, is another path to take. IDEA, which stands for the Individuals with, oops, sorry, my light just turned off. I haven't moved around. Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is a federal law, and it ensures that children receive a free and appropriate education to children classified with some sort of disability. And school systems, and this varies slightly state by state, have lists of different types of educational disability classifications. So in New York, some examples of these classifications could be autism, they could be other health impairments, or a learning disorder, or an intellectual disability. They could be classified as a student with a speech or language impairment. And having an IEP, which is a document that gets drawn up by the school or the school district in conjunction with the parents or the family, and it delineates all of the supports and the services that the child should be receiving in school. So it may specify the type of class that the child should be in. So should they be in a general education class? Should they be in an integrated co-teaching class, sometimes called co-teaching, ICT or CTT class, which is a regular size class generally with two teachers, a general education teacher and a special education teacher. Or perhaps a child needs a smaller class placement, like a 12:1:1. These are ratios of number of children to teachers or adults in the room, or an 8:1, or various other ratios of class size. It may document that the child needs some related services. Maybe they need counseling in school if there are some emotional challenges, particularly education related. They may provide speech and language therapy, or occupational or physical therapy. Perhaps a child needs some extra academic support. So in New York State, there's something, or New York City, there's something called SETS, Special Education Teacher Support Services, which would afford the child additional academic supports. Many districts outside of New York City call it resource room. And then under this IEP, this individualized education program, children can receive accommodations, such as extra time or questions read aloud, or many of these types of accommodations that we talked about children being eligible for under the 504 plan. So we have this school-based service route to go, where we could get accommodations under a 504 plan, or services and or accommodations under an IEP. Or we can seek supports outside of school. And this can include psychotherapy or counseling. It can include medication management. It can include speech and occupational therapy.
Please
Physical.
excuse the interruption. Just a quick reminder that we have 10 minutes before we'll start taking questions. All questions can be submitted through the Q&A section of the Zoom at the bottom of the screen.
Thank you. So these are all supports that families can seek for children outside of school. It's not uncommon for children to receive several of these types of supports or services. So let's say a child has ADHD and also a learning disability. They may be receiving medication management. They may be receiving psychotherapy. They may be receiving SETs, special education teacher support services for some of their learning needs. If a child, let's say, has some motor difficulties, they may be getting OT or PT, along with, let's say, speech and language therapy, if they also have some language weaknesses. So it's very common for kids and adolescents to receive supports in multiple areas, because you really want to make sure that all of their areas of need are being addressed. And children can also receive these supports both in school and out of school. So at the clinic that I work at, where we provide services outside of school, many, if not even, I would say probably the majority of children are also receiving supports in school, and they can supplement one another and work on potentially slightly different areas of functioning. But point being, they can co-occur. So multiple services can be received at the same time, and children and adolescents can receive supports both in school as well as out of school. Because again, you really want to make sure that all of the areas in need are being addressed. And in many circumstances, these different areas are very much interrelated. So let's say you have a child who has some language delays, and maybe they also have some learning disabilities in reading and writing, meaning that their reading and their writing skills, these are really areas that are quite challenging for them. And let's say they are acutely aware of some of these learning challenges, or acutely aware of some of their speech and language difficulties, which may include some expressive language difficulties or challenges really expressing themselves to others. That can be really frustrating for kids as well as their families. Sometimes there's an anxiety component. Maybe they get really nervous that the teacher is going to call on them to read out loud in school when they know that they're going to really struggle with that reading. So in an example like that, making sure that the emotional component is addressed along with some of those underlying difficulties like the learning and the language. Okay, so we're running short on time. I have a couple of slides left where we'll talk about how to find support out of school, some other helpful resources, and then I will stop talking so that if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to ask and I can do my best to answer. So how do I find support out of school. So let's say you make the decision as an adult, parent, caregiver that you want to seek support outside of school for your child or adolescent. You have lots of different options as far as how to proceed. One good first step, like I mentioned before, is consulting with the child's pediatrician. This may be an individual that knows the child well, has followed the child over time, maybe knows the family, um, probably has a network of referrals and resources that can be helpful to direct the parent to. So that is certainly one very reasonable option. The other is if a parent or caregiver or adult in the family knows the type of support, like let's say they know, I know that I would like my child to be in psychotherapy because I'm concerned about some difficulties, let's say regulating their emotions or regulating their behaviors. You can look on your
Pardon me, Dr. Rivelis. I just wanted the audience to know we have 5 minutes before we'll start taking people's questions.
You can look on your insurance company website, and they usually have ways of filtering providers by geographic region, sometimes by area of subspecialty, sometimes even by gender, if a family has a gender preference for a provider that they're seeking for their child. Looking into local outpatient clinics, mental health clinics, or developmental clinics that may provide the given support or service that the family is looking for the child. Local hospitals oftentimes have many of these services. And sometimes if you contact these clinics or these hospitals and they don't provide whatever service it is, a good question is maybe asking them for referral ideas. I mean, I often get phone calls if I a pop-up on someone's insurance website for someone, let's say, looking for adult services, and I am a child and adolescent psychologist and I work at a largely pediatric clinic. If someone calls me and says that they found my name on their website and they're looking for an adult therapist, I'm happy to give them a list of ideas, of resources that they can reach out to. So sometimes asking in that way can be helpful in pointing you in a direction as well. Other parents or people that you know are wonderful resources. They may have had experiences at certain clinics or with certain providers that can be helpful as far as word of mouth. And certainly schools, asking schools for referral resources or recommendations, even if the supports are taking place outside of school. And my last slide, or second to last slide, just has some additional, more specific resources. So at the top is if in need of immediate assistance, of course, 911 is an option, but there are also suicide prevention hotlines that can be called. Some of them even have texting capabilities. There are COVID specific resources. There's a wonderful resource called Project Hope that provides support with coping with COVID and related experiences. Special education resources. So Advocates for Children, I talked about that before on that 504 plan slide. They're a wonderful organization with a really wonderful website with lots of different information. If you Google Advocates for Children, the website immediately pops up and you can search and navigate for different resources. Legal Aid is also a really great organization. They have a component of Legal Aid focuses on special education supports and services. And so a lot of the families that I work with, if they have concerns that their child has not been receiving the supports and services that they should be receiving, often we will connect them with Legal Aid that has an 800 number as well as this website to help them really navigate that system and ensure that their children are receiving the supports and services needed. And then some other resources, NYC Well has a lot of referral and resource information, as well as Psychology Today, which focuses more on individual practitioners. It includes psychologists, social workers, even some psychiatrists, even though it says psychology in the title. And it can connect you with individual providers for certain types of therapeutic services. And it is a website that's easy to navigate because, again, you can filter by geographic location, by insurance. If you're looking to pay out of pocket, you can set a price range to connect you with a provider that could be a good fit. So all very good resources. And this is just my contact information. So we're gonna, I think, transition to a Q&A, and I'll do my best to answer any questions that anyone has. But if we run out of time or anyone has questions after today, you can feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to do my best to answer those questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Reveles, for such a great presentation. We do have a few minutes, and we're going to start taking some questions from the audience. And just bear with me for one moment while I get those questions up for you.
Sure.
How can parents request a 504 plan?
Great question. So you can contact your school directly. Many schools will help walk families through the process. Let's say it's a New York City school, a Department of Ed school. They have specific forms that they will want providers to fill out, but often the schools can help facilitate that. And the process basically would be the parent would access those forms. The school can either provide them, or if you even Google most school districts, certainly the Department of Education, if you Google NYC DOE 504 plan, the forms come up. And there is one form that families fill out. And there is a form that then families will facilitate having a provider fill out. And the provider could be a primary care physician, it could be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or another physician treating the child. And that would depend on what the reason for applying for the 504 plan would be. But I would say if someone is interested in pursuing that, to either speak with a provider that currently works with your child or the child's pediatrician, or contacting the school to find out, forms to fill out to pursue that.
Thank you. How do we teach our children to be smart about social media, especially when they can easily access information that might either be unsettling or, they might access information that's misinformation that could be unsettling or upsetting?
So that is a wonderful question, and one that comes up, I would say, on a daily basis for me with the families that I work with. That could be an entire conference. There's so much information on that to navigate. I guess it's hard for me to answer that in a concise way without spending an hour or so talking about it. But I would say one is, and of course this depends on the age of the child, but with children of a certain age, parental controls can be very helpful. But of course, as children get older, you want them to be able to make good decisions independently on what they do on social media or on the internet, what they watch, even as far as accuracy and how do they know if something that they're reading online is true or not, or someone that they're talking to on social media is who they say. So I think going back to one of the original slides where we talked about emotion expression and sort of keeping the lines of communication open, I would say talk to kids and adolescents about that and encourage them to share what they're doing on social media or what they're doing online, what they understand, what they don't understand. and really keeping those lines of communication open. But it's a really great question, and one that I think is so important to keep in mind with children and adolescents, many of whom are more technologically savvy than some of the adults that they are living with.
True. The next question reads, is occupational therapy, physical therapy, and/or tutoring paid for by the Board of Education if it is determined that they need the service, especially tutoring?
But I'm sorry, I missed the last. If occupational therapy, physical therapy, and tutoring
are paid for by the Board of Education, especially if it's determined that they need the service.
So there's different ways of getting these services. So one way of getting them is having an IEP, right? An individualized education program where the services are documented to be received on the IEP and to get them in school during the school week. Sometimes schools don't provide those services or have a service provider. And so families can, if those services are documented on the child's IEP, they can receive vouchers through the Department of Education to be able to reach out to a contracted provider. So the Department of Education will provide a list, and the families can reach out to those providers to coordinate receiving those services outside of school while being funded by the school or the school district. The third way that I would say to do it is there's something called compensatory services. And that is something that families can pursue independently, but I find often it's helpful when they work with a special education advocate or attorney. And basically what the advocates or the attorneys do is they say to the school district, this child should have been receiving certain services, let's say PT, OT, tutoring / sets, and they have not been getting it for whatever reason. The advocate or the attorney or the parent themselves can ask for compensatory services, which is basically like makeup services, where you say, you know, my child or this child should have been receiving certain services for the past X number of years. We are requesting that the school district fund those makeup hours. So fund the services and supports that the child should have been receiving. So those would be the three ways. The first way is clearly the most straightforward if the child can simply get those services in school with documentation on the IEP.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to say thank you to all of our audience today for joining us. Following the conclusion of this event, you're going to be receiving an email with a link, and that link will have a survey. So please complete that for your chance to be able to win an Amazon gift card. I want to thank our presenter again. And at this time, I want to take the opportunity to introduce the CEO of Adapt Community Network, Mr. Ed Matthews.
Hi, everybody, and thank you again for joining us on our Family Connect Summit. We hope we've been informative. We hope we've been educational. We hope we've gotten everything out of it that you wanted, and you'll certainly, with the surveys, that you'll let us know that. And we contend, as long as we're doing it, we hope you return. Make some recommendations to us, if you would, about things that you'd like to see in future summits. I think we're trying to make sure that when we reach you with topics that are concerning to you. We try to do it for families and people of every age group. So we hope that everybody got something out of it. I want to thank so much our family support team under our Vice President, Tracy Picard and Wendy De Leon, and the whole team who have put this together. And I think that it has been a labor of love for us. So I hope you all enjoyed it. We hope that you stay safe. We hope that you continue to support us in all the things that we do, as we will continue to support you. Your feedback is always welcome. It's always something that we want to hear, and it's always something that we try to make ourselves better. I think we do a good job, but we can always do a better job. We can always do something more that helps folks navigate both the good, the ups and the downs of life. So thank you all very, very much for being here. Again, thank you to all of our staff and all of our panelists who came and shared their expertise and shared their love of kids and adults with disabilities with you today. And again, stay safe. Thank you again for being here.